Now, now that the heat is on, we might be here. If y'all be cold. Starts where you have to make sure you log into that app all the way. So supposedly they're rolling it out slowly to y'all. But I know last week my senior said they had signed up for it, but it wasn't making you do it.
I
So
got the app and I like logged in and then I just logged in and I didn't know what else to do with the app.
yeah, I can see. Yeah, and the app never worked for me. So like that's why you see me getting texts to sign in, because that was the only way I could get it to work. So, yeah, it's weird. Apparently, the reason we're doing it is because we should have always been doing it. It was like not safe not to have it.
It has app and it just like shows me my stuff. It doesn't like tell me.
I mean, I guess if you have the app, it's probably doing what it's supposed to, but you know, I have no idea.
Every day that my password's gonna reset.
Oh, yeah, they said that for like a month beforehand. Alrighty, so it's 9. Give me just a minute. I'm gonna go through the folks on Zoom and make sure I have them all in. And then we'll go ahead and get started. A couple quick things. If you look at Blackboard right now, I left the zeros in just so people had a chance to look at it. You still have till the end of the semester to get all of those in. And I'll go through and clear up the zeros probably at the end of the week. But I wanted you all to see what your grades would look like if you didn't turn the stuff in, basically. And so for some of you, you're only missing a couple things. So it's not bringing down your grade too much. But for folks who, for example, haven't done anything or only have done a couple assignments on Connect, like it might pull you down to failing. So just get those done. They honestly don't take, okay, the Learn Smart modules take a while, but the little activities take you maybe 10, 15 minutes. So get those in, your grades will come back up. I also discovered for some reason, I have no idea why, Connect isn't syncing with Blackboard like it usually does. So there's several of you that when you finish an assignment, it won't come over. So I'm going to try to be better about going on to Connect every week to update those, because traditionally it just pulls those over for me. And it's not doing that for some people, but it is for others. I don't know, technology is supposed to make our lives easier, but I don't really buy it all the time, right? This is an example of that. So I will try to be more on top of that and keep you all updated. But yeah, if you look at your grade and you're like, whoa, feel free to make an appointment with me, come in and talk to me, grab me after class. Probably gonna be better to set up an appointment just so we can kind of look at everything all together. We can screen share. If you like haven't done anything but the in-class assignments, you know, be very reasonable with yourself about how realistic it will be for you to finish it or not. You have until November 4th to drop a class if you need to. I don't want anyone in here to drop, but I also don't want anyone to fail. So again, if you're kind of worried about that, not sure, shoot me an email, set up an appointment on my Calendly, and we can chat about it. But most people are definitely in a place where if you just turn in those assignments that you're missing, your grade's gonna shoot right up. Because again, you usually get, pretty high points for those, and replacing zeros with tens is gonna make things go up pretty quickly, right? So Friday, I will be distributing the exam 2 here in class. So Zoom folks, please do come in. If you are sick and you can't come in, let me know and we can figure something out so that I can get it to you, and you don't have to like infect other people. Or if you're so sick that you can't get out of bed, that you don't have to do that. So definitely let me know if that's what's going on. Again, I'll hang out in class if anyone does want to work on it in here to ask me questions. But if you're someone who works on it better remote, not here, that's also fine. You can go elsewhere and work on it. And this time you'll have a whole weekend. So you'll have till Monday to turn it in class. Today, what we're gonna do is we have a few more slides for our social psych lecture. And then I think we should actually be able to actually do the Jeopardy, hooray, to help you all study. And I have already posted the Jeopardy on Blackboard. So if you go on Blackboard under review, the Jeopardy is there so that you can use it to study as well. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and share screen for our remote folks today. Going into our slideshow. And there we go. All righty. So I'm a little behind on uploading. I will try to get those all uploaded today so that if you've missed a class, you can use that to help you catch up for the exam. My notes are obviously, the PowerPoints are up there too, although I fill in a lot more. So, all right, the first thing we're going to talk about today is defensive attribution. So if you remember, just to kind of refresh us, we've been talking about the fundamental attribution error and attributions we have about ourselves versus other people. And so defensive attribution is blaming the victim. It's holding the victim responsible for what happened to them instead of whoever actually victimized them. And you might be like, why the heck do people do this? This is really obnoxious. It is, right? But such attribution has a self-protective function. You feel less likely to be victimized in the same situation if you can blame it on something the victim did. Because then you can be like, well, I would never do that, so I'm going to be okay. So an example here is sexual assault. People will say, oh, well, she was wearing such and such, and I would never wear that, right? When we know, unfortunately, people are sexually assaulted regardless of what they're wearing, and it's all about power for the assaulter. Yeah.
Is this chapter 13 or chapter 12?
Good question. Whichever one is the social psych chapter.
Okay.
Yes. Like, which chapter is which?
It's 13.
Thank you. It is 13. Yeah, we're wrapping up 13 here. And so this can also be for things like car accidents, right? Like, oh, that person must have done something dangerous. I would never do that. So I won't get in a car accident, right? Even though that person, might have been doing everything right since someone else caused the accident, or, sometimes there are just horrific things that go wrong with vehicles. Like, I don't know if y'all remember, gosh, it might have been like 10 years ago now, where I think it was Honda, the brakes would fail on some of their cars and people would just like not be able to stop. It was terrifying, right? They fixed that. But, people don't want to think that could happen to me if I'm driving the same kind of car, right? So they blame it on that person. And this can be explained by something called the just world hypothesis. So a psychologist named Lerner came up with this. Another name associated with this is Jost, J-O-S-T. And this is the assumption that the world is just, and so people get what they deserve. And obviously, we'd all love to think that, but unfortunately, it's not always true, right? That sometimes bad things happen to good people, right? And it can be totally awful. But again, if we can say, well, bad things happen to bad people, therefore that victim must have been bad in some way, and I'm not bad, so it won't happen to me. It helps us deal with a lot of like fear and anxiety and kind of avoid it and push it to the side. So it can certainly be something that again helps the individual, but then, as you can imagine, makes it more difficult for the victim or the survivor. And in fact, this is often internalized by people who have survived things like accidents, sexual assaults, physical assaults, things along those lines, where they think, I must be a horrible person because this happened to me, when in fact, not the case. But this is protective, and this is why we do this. And obviously, attributions in their extreme form go into things like prejudice. So prejudice is, oh, we got a question here. Yes, common for the survivors of emotional abuse. Abby, that's such a good point. Emotional abuse, physical abuse, financial abuse. If you're not familiar with that, it's when people, your partner will control all the finances and like tell you, well, you can't leave me. Guess what are you gonna do? You don't have any money. But yeah, emotional abuse as well. And you just think, I deserve it. Often because the person emotionally abusing you has been saying that, right? Yeah, and so this again can go into things like prejudice. So prejudice is a negative attitude towards members of a group. And usually based on completely unjustified assumptions, right? So prejudice is an attitude, a negative attitude towards members of a particular group. Discrimination is behavioral. So discrimination is behaving differently, often unfairly, towards the members of a group. Now, old-fashioned quote-unquote discrimination still happens, and this is the overt discrimination, where you would clearly deny someone a job or a promotion or access to something because of whatever that is, race, sexual orientation, what have you. So again, that still exists, although I think that most people frown upon that. Certainly, unfortunately, there are people who don't. So it's less accepted. Doesn't mean it's not accepted by some people. However, more modern discrimination is more covert, where you might privately harbor negative attitudes towards a minority group, and then that might unintentionally affect, for example, whether or not you hire someone, or you only are explicit about that when you feel that it's safe to discriminate, right? When you're in a company where everyone else is equally prejudiced, for example, or when you feel that your views are justified. They're not, right? And prejudice and discrimination often go together, but sometimes there are discriminatory acts, again, without the person realizing they're prejudiced. And sometimes people will sort of begrudgingly not discriminate, but you can still very clearly see their prejudice. So the best tool to reduce prejudice, not surprisingly, is education about people who are different from us through direct contact. And you can actually use all those persuasion techniques that we talked about to change attitudes as well. So, and really interesting things with learning. So I'll give you an example. A few years back at a conference, I saw Albert Bandura, who did a lot of the research on like social learning by watching other people talk. And he has taken that idea, he's actually since passed, but you know, obviously still alive at that point in time. But he took that idea and he applied it to media. So for example, in sub-Saharan Africa, in certain countries, you know, AIDS is very stigmatized. And so they took popular radio shows and they would write HIV positive characters into them. And what they found is when they surveyed the public, acceptance went up. They did the same thing in Mexico with telenovelas. Introduced an HIV positive character, you saw discrimination go down, acceptance go up. So we can find ways to do this that aren't like beating people over the head with it. All right, so I actually already talked about the Stanford Prison Experiment, but I'll talk a little bit more here. So the participants were randomly assigned to be the prisoners or guards, and they pulled them from a large pool of volunteers. In the full documentary that Zimbardo himself made, there's a guy who's just like, it was like I was trying to find a summer job and I was going to get paid more for 2 weeks than I would like working for a month. So why wouldn't I do it? That type of thing. And there were no systematic differences between the two groups before the experiment. But obviously, as we saw, there were dramatic differences that came up during the experiment itself. The guards really behaved aggressively. The prisoners became almost pathologically passive, like to the point that they would refer to themselves by their prisoner number and not their names. And then it was really, they created this like new social reality. And as I mentioned previously, the experiment was forced to end early. And there are a lot of modern implications here. And I'll pull this up.
Most of the evil in the world comes about not out of evil motives, but somebody said.
So this is Zimbardo talking about evil.
Most of the evil in the world comes about not out of evil motives, but somebody saying, you know, get with the program, be a team player. When a person feels I am not personally responsible, I am not accountable, it's the role I'm playing, or these are the orders I've gotten, then you allow yourself to do things you would never do under ordinary circumstances.
I began to feel that I was losing my identity, that the person that I call Clay, the person who put me in this place, the person who volunteered to go into this prison, because it wasn't prison, it still is prison. I don't look on it as an experiment or a simulation. It was just a prison that was run by psychologists instead of run by the state. I had really...
So that guy that just talked is the one that I mentioned last week that actually went on in his life to become a prison psychologist. Like this, being in this experiment affected him so profoundly that it changed his whole like career goals.
Thought that I was incapable of this kind of behavior. I was surprised, no, I was dismayed to find out that I could really be that I could act in a manner so absolutely unaccustomed to anything I would even really dream of doing. And while I was doing it, I didn't feel any regret. I didn't feel any guilt. It was only afterwards when I began to reflect on what I had done that this behavior began to dawn on me, and I realized that this was a part of me I hadn't really noticed before.
I feel so up inside. I feel really up inside. You don't know. I gotta go. To a doctor. Anything.
This is one of the kids. I mean, not kids. They were adults, but like when you hear this, you feel like they're kids, right? But this is one of the participants who had essentially like a mental breakdown during the experiment.
I can't say that. I'm up. I don't know how to explain it. I'm all up inside. Out! Out now! God damn it! I'm up. You don't know. I mean, God. I mean, Jesus Christ, I'm burning up inside, don't you know? I just can't take it.
The scene you just saw was at the end of only 36 hours into this study. Each day after that, another prisoner had a similar reaction. And so at the end of 5 days, we had 5 kids. Kids we chose because they were normal and healthy, having emotional breakdowns.
You put a uniform on.
Yeah, so they like basically screened these people and they rejected anybody who had like had a psychiatric diagnosis before. So these were people without a psychological history. And this next guy who's going to talk is the John Wayne guy.
and are given a role, I mean, a job, saying your job is to keep these people in line, then you're certainly not the same person as if you were in street clothes and in a different role. You really become that person once you put on that khaki uniform, you put on the glasses, you take the nightstick, and you act the part. That's your costume, and you have to act accordingly when you put it on.
It harms me.
Why?
I mean harms. I mean in the present tense, it harms me.
How did it harm you? How does it harm you? Just to think about it, you mean that people can be like that?
Yeah. It let me in on some knowledge that I've never experienced firsthand. I've read about it. I've read a lot about it, but I've never experienced it firsthand. I've never seen someone turn that way. And I know you're a nice guy. You know?
You
Do you understand? I do. I do know you're a nice guy.
Then why,
I don't
do you hate
get
me?
that because I know what you can turn into.
It surprised me that no one said anything to stop me. No one said, Carmen, you can't say those things to me. Those things are sick. Nobody said that. They just accepted what I said. I said, go tell that man to the face he's the scum of the earth, and they'd do it without question. They'd do push-ups without question. They'd sit in the hole. They'd abuse each other. And here they're supposed to have they're supposed to be together as a unit in jail, but here they're abusing each other because I requested them to, and no one questioned my authority at all. And it really shocked me. Why didn't people, when I started to abuse people so much, I started to get so profane that, and still people didn't say anything.
Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing.
So this, I think, also goes into what we talked about with cults and groupthink, right? That to just try to survive, a lot of times people will just kind of go along with what the authority figure is saying. And here you see that where, these prisoners, again, like the guy was saying, you would hope that they'd stand up for each other, but instead they turned on this other guy.
Bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing.
As soon as I realized that 819 could hear this, I rushed to the room where I had left him. And what I found was a boy crying hysterically, while in the background his fellow prisoners were chanting and yelling that he is a bad prisoner and that they were being punished because of him.
Because of what prisoner 819 did, my cell is a mess. Because of what prisoner 819 did, my cell is a mess.
Well, I'm trying to comfort this young man, and he says, I have to go back. I said, what do you mean? I have to prove to them I'm not a bad prisoner. And at this point, I said, no, you're not a bad prisoner. You're Stu, and I'm not the superintendent. I'm Phil Zimbardo. The study is over. And he kept saying, no, I have to go back. I'm not a bad prisoner. And so the reality of that prison was so deep that even when I'm giving him the opportunity to leave, his reputation, his image as a bad prisoner has to be undone, has to be reconciled. When we released the first prisoner, 8612, we brought in a substitute, but he came in halfway through. And
He's just going to talk about some of the other aspects of the study, but just again to kind of see what are the long-term effects on these guys, and again, seeing the problem of ethical violations, right? Zimbardo had a dual role here. He was playing the superintendent, but he was also the principal investigator. So if he really wanted to play the superintendent, he should have had someone else who was the principal investigator and could step in and say, this is ridiculous, stop, right? But he didn't have that. So yeah, major problem. So some other things related to social cognition in terms of how we think about other people relative to ourselves. One is stereotype threat. So this is a self-fulfilling fear about being judged on the basis of a negative stereotype about the group we're in. So if there's a negative stereotype about whatever group you're a member of, racially, sexual orientation, some people might actively try not to fit that, right? And sometimes to weird degrees. So I give you kind of a silly example. When I was in high school, college age, I didn't really understand sort of modern definitions of feminism. And so I was like, I gotta just not be girly and I'll watch football with the guys. And I'm like, I like other sports. I can watch pretty much every other sport, but I do not like football. So it was like a really dumb, shallow way of thinking about it, right? And sometimes stereotype threat is protective too, right? If you can show, oh, I'm not like this stereotype, then it might help you get a job, or it might literally save your life, right? In some cases. Yes, very common with certain diagnoses. Yeah, for sure. Social comparison is actually something I myself study quite a bit in my research. And this is where we evaluate ourselves by comparing ourselves to other people. So we evaluate maybe our behaviors, our abilities, even our thoughts and feelings, or what I study is when we evaluate our appearance relative to other people. And the original guy who came up with this theory, his name is Leon Festinger, and he said, this is beneficial for humans, right? If you can compare yourself to someone who's getting A's and you're getting B's, and you figure out, oh, they're studying more than I am, you try studying more, you get A's, right? That's really beneficial. What's really interesting is in some modern ways, there are times that comparison is not beneficial and yet we keep doing it. So appearance is one of the key examples of this. We continually compare our appearance to images we know are photoshopped, right? To people we know have personal trainers and have the luxury of working out way more than we ever could. And it makes us feel really bad about ourselves, but we still do it. And so that is really interestingly different from how Festinger proposed this theory. And as you can imagine, can have negative psychological consequences, including body dissatisfaction and extreme cases, eating disorders. All right, so cognitive dissonance. This is a term that I think has kind of like entered pop culture vernacular and isn't always used accurately. So the actual definition of cognitive dissonance is the idea that you have two different dissonant thoughts and you're uncomfortable because how can I hold two thoughts that are so different at the same time? So you can think about your attitudes versus your behaviors, right? This will happen quite a bit with people who might really strongly believe in justice and equity, and then they see someone being discriminated against and they don't say anything, right? That can be a big part where we experience cognitive dissonance. And again, oftentimes that's because we're afraid to speak up, we might think it's not our issue, et cetera, et cetera. We can reduce the dissonance in two ways, maybe not surprisingly. We can change our behaviors to match our attitudes. So in that case, we could start actually saying something if we see someone discriminated against, right? It might be scary, but we speak up. But we could also change our attitudes to match our behaviors. And unfortunately, this is what happens sometimes, where people will just be like, well, I guess I'm not that person, so maybe I am prejudiced, and it's not even conscious necessarily. It just sort of happens in their mind. They go along with things more and can kind of buy into those discriminatory attitudes. Some of you may have seen this in older relatives, right? When I was growing up, my family really taught me about equity and treating everyone the same and making sure people had equal opportunities. And like now some members of my family just love Fox News. And this is cognitive dissonance for me. I don't understand. Like, how did you change that much, right? But sometimes what happens is your attitudes change to match your behaviors. And so cognitive dissonance theory was also from Festinger. And the idea here is that we're motivated towards consistency between those attitudes and behaviors and away from inconsistency. So an example here might be, I hate my job, I need to develop a better attitude towards it, or I need to quit. And then self-perception theory came from Bem. The Bems, big in social psych. They also did a lot of theorizing about gender and gender roles. But the idea here is we make inferences about our attitudes by perceiving and examining our behavior and the context in which it occurs. And that it might involve inducements to behave in some way. So I'm spending all my time thinking about how much I hate my job. I must actually not like it, and maybe it's not good for me, right? I think a lot of people experience this self-perception during the pandemic, right? When they realize like, there are other jobs out there where I will be treated better, right? I don't have to put up with this. So here's another example. Imagine a situation in which a woman who values financial security is in a relationship with a man who's financially irresponsible. So the conflict, it's important for her to be financially secure, but her behavior conflicts with that. She's with this guy who isn't financially responsible, and you know, that if they get married, that could go into her money too. So in order to reduce the dissonance between belief and behavior, she can either break up with the guy or reduce her emphasis on financial security. So in the case of choosing to reduce her emphasis on financial security, the dissonance could be further minimized by emphasizing the positive qualities about her significant other rather than focusing on this perceived flaw. A more common example of cognitive dissonance occurs in the purchasing decisions we make on a regular basis. Most people want to hold the belief they make the choices, and when a product or item we purchase turns out badly, it can conflict with that. And some people will just like buy into stuff that's not working for them. Diet products are a really good example of this, right? Like diet pills are largely ineffective, especially over the long run. But if you've invested a lot of money in them, people will keep choosing them, right? No, it's got to work. I'm just not trying hard enough. So both cognitive dissonance theory and self-perception theory explain this connection between attitudes and behavior. Alrighty. So now we're going to go ahead and flip over to our Jeopardy. Put this in slideshow and turn on our captions. And again, this is posted on Blackboard if you want to use it to study later. Alrighty, so our categories are gender bender. Let's talk about sexuality. What's your personality? So this one's about personality testing and traits. Theorize this about our personality theories. Relationship issues from social psych, and then mind control from social psych. I'm just going to go in order, so we'll start with gender. So this is the social and psychological aspects of being male or female. So sex is the biological one. So this would be, yeah, gender, yeah. Again, I try to actually scale them so they get harder. This one's a super easy one. But again, this is something that can confuse all of us at times. Alrighty, the default sex in utero. Yeah, exactly. So all fetuses are female until a certain part where if there's a Y chromosome present, there will be like a wash of androgens. And then the sex organs were start to develop in the male direction. All right, the amount of femininity and or masculinity you show. This might be through your clothes or how you act, things along those lines. This goes back to the genderbread person. And maybe I should have made, yeah, you have it. Woo, you got it. Gender expression. Okay, so this is how you outwardly show your gender. And there are more than one of these, but what are some of the biological properties used to determine sex? How do we know? Go ahead. Hormones. Yeah, hormones, huge. Yeah. What else? So just like, how would we know in theory, again, not always in practice, but in theory, if someone is biologically male or female? Yeah, Nora. Sex organs, yeah. Genes, right? XXXY, even though we've learned that those aren't perfectly, clear cut. things along those lines. Onyx, I just have to say, I appreciate that you do what I do, which is even when you're wearing a mask, you like automatically squeeze it to your arm. I did that at a store yesterday and I was like, I guess I don't need to do that, but I very much appreciate it. All right, and this is a theory that says that gender roles are based on the division of labor. Again, they get harder as we go up higher. So this one is social role theory. Basically explains gender roles by saying they exist because they kind of developed because they had to. Alrighty, keep going here. So the direction of one's erotic interests. Yeah, you got it, sexual orientation. And again, it says erotic, not just sexual, because it can also be romantic, right? This type of, wow, definitely put the answer in the question. Cool, this type of socialization takes different forms and tropes of different genders. So it's supposed to be sexual. Guys, you know, at least you know I'm human too. So yes, sexual socialization. All right. The best type of sex ed according to research. Yeah, exactly. Comprehensive. So when you're talking about everything, STIs, birth control, but also sexuality, romance, eroticism. The most effective type of contraceptive for people who are going to have sex. The most effective is abstinence. That's not realistic for most people. What's that? Actually, no, those are only about 87% effective. There's a group of birth control that is about 99% effective. Yeah, hormonal. So these are things like the pill, the patch, the ring, things along those lines. Exactly.
So when you say contraceptive, you're just talking about being pregnant.
Yes. Yep. So contraceptives, you know, some of them will also prevent STIs like condoms, right? But the vast majority of them won't, right? So birth controls is great in terms of like helping you not get pregnant, but it's not going to protect you against any STIs. Yeah, really good question. All right, you can still be fired for this in many of the 50 states. Yeah, your sexuality or your gender identity. I think I have both in the answers here. All right, so now we're on to personality testing. The test where people say what they see, Jesus, I can spell y'all, I promise, in ink blots. Anyone remember the name of the ink blot test? Yeah, it just started Rorschach. It's a weird word. So again, I've never make you come up with that. They would either be in a word bank or the answer of a multiple choice. This is a type of personality assessment that are long questionnaires to measure broad characteristics. So these are personality inventories. So these include things like the MMPI, the PAI, the 16PF. Personality traits that spell the word ocean, you don't have to name them, just tell me what the category is, what the overall name for these traits is. It's the big something, yeah, the big five, exactly. So actually, if anybody has taken or is going to take the study that I posted that I emailed y'all about, one of the things that we're measuring there is the big five. So you'll get to fill that out.
So if you did that, sorry, this is kind of related. If you did the thing you sent out, would that count towards the like one assignment we have?
Yep. So that counts as one of your psychology experience credit studies. You just write up your little summary about what it was like taking it. Exactly. Yep. And then I know we're working on an IRB for another study. And then I might have a third study that I'm help running for somebody else. So hopefully there'll be more soon.
So we have to do 4.
Right, and they can be any combination of actual studies or articles.
And then would you like us to turn it off at the time or one by one?
I would say as you get them done, just turn them in, just so they're fresh in your mind. But you have till the end of the semester. Very good question. All right, this is a short self-report questionnaire that measures depression. We had some sample items from it on our PowerPoint. And again, this is up there, if it's a little harder, more specific. This is the Beck Depression Inventory. Again, not something I would typically make pull out of thin air if there would be some sort of multiple choice or word bank going on there. An unscientific personality test that's still widely used in employment. We watched a video about it, if anybody remembers. Yeah, the Myers-Briggs. I have no relation to that person, even though their last name is spelled the same way. I mean, that probably means we're related somehow, but I'm not a direct descendant, I swear. Alrighty. So now we're going to talk about theories. So Maslow idolized people who reached the top of his hierarchy. So if we think about Maslow's triangle, what's at the top? Yeah. Exactly. So he was idolizing people that he said had gotten to this point. All right, the Freudian stage where toilet training is the key experience. It's anal. I know it's okay if no one wants to shout it out. That's fine. It's a weird thing to shout out at like 9:40 in the morning. Yeah, that's fine. Yep. All right. The theorist who created the diagnostic profile and was Freud's true intellectual heir. Yep, exactly. Anna, his daughter, Anna Freud, the other Freud. A theorist who said that all parents have a basic evil towards their children. It's the other female theorist we talked about, if that helps you. So this is Karen Horney. It is pronounced Horney, not Horny, although a lot of people go in that direction. Yeah, and it's totally cool that we're still remembering these things. All right, and then a personality theory that says our life story is our identity. Yeah, exactly. So Dan McAdams came up with this, and it has two terms. You can either call it psychobiography or just the life story approach. So now we're going to talk about relationships, the best type of love according to Sternberg's triangle theory. Yeah, consummate. Yep, y'all got it. Awesome. Consummate. So like kind of like consummate, but it's not, if that makes sense. All right, adult attachment style, where people want to merge with their partner, which scares people away. And this one's a little more complicated, and it was in one of the charts on the PowerPoint. So this is anxious ambivalent. So these people like are too clingy, basically. Infants who had this type of attachment cried when their parents left, but were easily comforted. And this is the ideal attachment style. Yeah, secure, exactly. So this is what we want, and the vast majority of infants are this, I think like 60%. This idea says that people choose mates of the same attractiveness as themselves. So this is the matching hypothesis. Again, just a fancy term for saying this. and the type of culture where arranged marriages are more common. So this is the collectivist, or you'll sometimes hear collectivistic. So we, in America, we like to say this is an individualistic culture, although certainly subcultures differ. But collectivistic cultures where sort of the group matters more, this would be more common. All right, so now we're going to talk about some of the stuff we just finished talking about in terms of things that make people do weird things, essentially. So the name of the psychologist who did the classic study on conforming using Confederates, which is a fancy name for people who were in on it, and line length. Yeah, exactly. Solomon Asch. And Milgram had people do this task to a learner to study obedience. What did they do to the learner when they got it wrong? Yeah, they thought they shocked them at least, right? Not really. A type of thought with impaired decision-making to maintain group harmony. We see this a lot in cults, for example, but also any group that gets like overly connected and listening to an authority figure. So this is called groupthink. This is where you would just sort of like go along with the group rather than speaking up if you have a concern.
The names of it are always a lot more simple than I think.
Right? Yeah, I mean, most of them are, and then you get some weird ones. So that's the annoying thing about psychology. If we just named everything like groupthink, it'd be really easy to remember everything. But
Like, I think too much on those ones.
right? But yeah, sometimes we give stuff like overly complicated names. All right, this is a persuasion technique where you ask for something too big so that when the person says no, you can ask for a more reasonable task. Exactly, door in the face. Here, will you put this billboard in your yard? No. Well, what if you just put a little like normal size yard sign? Okay, I guess I could do that. All right, and then persuasion is most effective when the source is this. There's two possible answers. Likable, yeah. And then the other one is credible. Of course, as we talked about, credibility, a little skewed in the age of the internet. All right, and then our final Jeopardy question here is thinking what you do is because of external factors, but what others do is because of internal factors. And this is, yeah. That's right, fundamental attribution error, exactly. So again, this isn't every question I'll ask at the exam, but it gets you kind of the types of things I want you all to be thinking about. So I will see you all on Friday to distribute the exam. Please feel free to shoot me an email between now and then if you have any questions.